updated chart for it. There's been a release of a stable namespace, and this one is done. Next on the list should be Polygon, and it shouldn't take that long. So that Cello release. Other than that, there has been new charts for Nimbus, Arbitrum Nitro. Arbitrum Nitro has a new release, 2.3, kind of a recent one, which now requires a beacon endpoint. So besides using the layer 1 execution node, it also needs to be provided an URL for the consensus layer. So you need to adjust your config accordingly. And you need to also update to this version, preferably before, I don't remember the exact date, but at some point before mid-March, in order to be able to keep up with the chain head. So update when you can. This requirement of an endpoint for the beacon node also exposed kind of a shortcoming of our deployments with the namespaces, which is the execution layers leverage proxy as a load balancer and serves as high availability. So in case you deploy multiple execution nodes, you have that neat proxy endpoint that should work even if only one is online or up to chain heads or working properly. The beacon nodes do not have such an endpoint, so you'll be at a dilemma when you want to configure, if you're using Launchpad and it deploys, say, Ethereum with multiple replicas or multiple, with a scaling interface and multiple consensus layer nodes, you will be missing a single endpoint that you can use that will work on this scenario. So you can hook it up to a specific instance, or you just need to create a Kubernetes service that just has a backend that all the Nimbus or Lighthouse or whatever it is you're using for a consensus layer as a backend. On the short term, longer term, we're looking into providing a load balancer for beacon APIs, beacon nodes. So that should be coming at some point as well. Then there's been proxy, which has some changes, simplified default config that uses WebSockets. Some charts in general have been fixed to support WebSockets, namely Aragon and Arbitrum as well. A new Lighthouse release, Cello node and Graph node. Regarding namespaces, there's been stable releases for Ingress, monitoring, sealed secrets, Graph, Gnosis, Ethereum, Arbitrum 1, and Cello, which saw its first release. Any questions there? I think. Give it a second. Just let me look at the chat. You can't have one Lighthouse for multiple instances, but you can, I think Nimbus supports it. In practice, it kind of just creates a directory for each of the execution layers it's managing, but so there's not too much of an advantage there. I think it's Nimbus. There's one of the consensus layers that does support that mode, but I don't see the benefit. You don't save disk space. You don't save that much, and it doesn't seem like the best option in terms of high availability. But yes, one of them does support that, a single deployment managing multiple execution layers.
Yeah, so what we did for us is so we're running Firehose, which is using Geeth, and we're running Aragon for RPCs. And so the lighthouses that are attached to the Aragon nodes, we put those publicly internally inside the network, available so that they can be used by Arbitrum, Nitro, or Optimism to get the blobs. So that's how we managed it internally. And then we used health checks with console, so it pulls the lighthouses out that are not in sync of the cluster, so that because we don't have that proxy service you mentioned.
Yes, we hope to provide that on namespaces reasonably soon. I did some work there already. Actually, I stopped testing it because the chart that we were using seems to have hardwired one replica, and I'm not entirely sure yet of its ability to be scaled up, or if there's it's a stateful set, if there's something missing there. But other than that, should be nearby. Yeah, okay. So let's keep going. Our Alertmanager. So as I was saying, Alertmanager is the last piece. You have Prometheus gathering metrics, and you have Loki gathering logs. And in both instances, that provides you with a ton of data. And then Prometheus, both Prometheus or Loki roller can be processing roles that trigger an event. Those events get routed to Alertmanager, which is a manager for those alerts, those events. So what would you want from a system like that? You probably want to receive those notifications somewhere else, somewhere that you choose, say like a Slack message, or you want to get a phone call, or you want to get some notifications on your preferred channel. So that's one of the functionalities that Alertmanager is responsible for, which is selecting notifications based on some criteria. The criteria will be labels based, as everything. It's a general theme. So you kind of select alerts, and then you route them to different channels that you can configure. Those channels are the receivers you configure into Alertmanager, and it does support a ton. We can take a look very quickly at that. By default, in terms of receiver integrations, you have things like Discord, email, Microsoft Teams, Opportunity, PagerDuty, Pushover, like this list here, Slack, VictorOps, and then just general webhooks. You can actually build your own workloads or like a simple script that just exposes a webhook and build an event-based kind of response. You can leverage the metrics you do have to trigger events, and then run something as a consequence of that with a simple webhook. Okay. Other than that, you probably want to group them because some alerts will be interrelated, or you want to group them by workloads or by different kind of groups of workloads. You want to duplicate them, and this may not be as obvious, but if you keep in mind that we were covering a highly available stack, so that means you'll have multiple Prometheus or multiple Loki rollers, and each one of them will be processing the same roles, so that you have availability, right? So that if one is down, you still have some other Prometheus just triggering that same alert. That means that all your alerts will have been duplicated. So you really need to duplicate them. Otherwise, a single condition that is happening will generate multiple warnings, depending on how many replicas you're scaling up to. You may want to rate limit the alerts, which are kind of get very noisy. And very often, I think the most common use case is that you want to be notified when something is amiss. But after you are notified, it starts being a bother, right? To have like alarms going off all the time about something you're already looking into and know. So you probably want to control a bit that noise factor, and you want to be able to silence them. And that's kind of, we're just going over what the future set of Alertmanager is. There's one missing, inhibition rules. Inhibition rules are kind of the same as silencing, but not really. They're meant for you to express that when certain alert is firing, then you don't want a second, some other alert also be firing at the same time. So you want to inhibit it. And the use case for that will be, say that you create a rule to warn you when some PVC, some disk is 70% full. And then you have the same rule, but with a label of critical or just like a higher degree of severity, or when the disk is like 90% full or 95% full. Well, when it's 90%, it's also 70%, right? So you'll have those two alerts with different severity levels firing at the same time. And that's the use case for inhibition rules, for you to be able to express that when the 90% one is firing, then it inhibits the other one. So this is kind of a tool set, and the challenge here is to build based on labels. There will be an alerting system that gives you what you need, is usable. It does not lead to alert fatigue, which is kind of what happens when we have way too many bells going off all the time, things that you're ignoring or are not critical. You kind of will end up reducing the value of the whole system because you will end up ignoring the alerts and won't serve their purpose. So something to watch out for. Now going over a bit more in detail about how you'll configure those. In terms of routing, let's look a bit at the configuration. You'll start like first thing. Oh, I need to reopen my stuff because I had to reboot. So sorry, just a second. So this should be around here. I should have some Alertmanager config. Here it is. The first thing you probably want to do is configure some receivers. And you have an example here with Slack. And we have a null receiver. This is kind of useful if you want to whitelist some alerts to go to Slack and have a default that doesn't go anywhere by default. The receivers, there are plenty, as we've seen, but the configuration is, well, it's receiver specific, what you need to input as keys, but it's generally reasonably simple. It's just like the bare minimum needed. In case of Slack, you need to give it either a token, an URL, an endpoint, or a file with that same information, a channel name, and not much else. All of the rest you see here is just it's just cosmetic. It's about templating the messages and how they look. So yes, okay. So you set up a list of receivers on this key, and then you have a route section where you have a few parameters.
Carlos,
One of them,
sorry to interrupt.
yes.
Can you zoom in a bit, please?
I cannot. At least. No, I've tried this before. I don't know what's wrong, but I kind of asked it to increase font size, but it just toggles between these two sizes. And I don't have a solution for this yet. So this is the maximum size. I'm able to increase actually, I think, in a different way. I should be able to just upscale in this. This may work. No, this is just working for the windows and buttons. It's not.
Does Control Plus work?
No, it's just a hotkey for that thing that instead of keep increasing my font size, just toggles between two different sizes. which is rather useless. I don't know why it's doing that. It should just keep enlarge the font size, but it's not working. But okay, receivers, we have this list of receivers and route. Regarding grouping, on route we have this top level group by key. And this is the only parameter you have to set up routing. And you basically give it labels that you want to group your alerts by. So alert name seems rather useless to have here, because as soon as you do a group by alert name, that means that each alert will have a different name, or most of them will have different names, and then you'll have one group per alert name. So this kind of defeats a bit the purpose of grouping things. You probably want to group, say, by severity or whatever. Point being, this is the full extent of the functionality you have to group alerts. It's just a list of labels. So all the hard lifting will have to be done in your labeling schema. You'll have to pick and label things to reflect the groups that you're going to want to have, so that then you include those labels here, and it will generate you groups. Then you have two parameters, group weight and group interval. And those are meant to tune how long it waits when a certain group starts firing an alert, and how long it waits before repeating notifications, because it will repeat it. It's not a once and done. While something is continuously firing, there will be a loop that will repeat the notification in certain intervals. That will be repeat interval. Group interval will be the same for the groups. Group wait will be waiting before the first instance, when it receives an alert for the first time before firing. Why would you want it to wait? You'll want it to wait because if you want to group messages, say receive a single notification that 5 different alerts all related to some label, to some group you might are firing, if it reacts or it responds immediately, there will not be any time to do about it. It kind of needs a buffer, right? How can it group if it instantly responds or reacts to each event it receives? So that group wait is what allows it to wait a bit to see if there's going to be another thing triggering that it will want to group with, and send them off on the same message. So this is basically all you have on Alertmanager for grouping. I think there's a Control Plus doesn't work. And then you have a route section, also very simple. It's a list. You start with matchers. And matchers will be a list of basically key values, which just means labels. You select alerts based on labels, and then you point them to a specific receiver. So matchers, list of labels, receiver. And there's a third keyword here, which is continue. Given this is a list, so it's possible that as it tries to match a certain alert down this list, it matches at some point and could match somewhere else down the stack. The continue parameter basically allows you to tune that behavior. If continue is false, it means it won't try to keep matching downwards down the stack. If it's true, it's possible for an alert to match.
Oops.
Yeah,
Did we lose?
I think we lost him. Yes.
All this content takes me back to the when I worked at certain other big, large company where we were in the alerting processing business and generating support tickets from alerts and things like this.
You'll have to share some war stories at some point, Matthew.
War stories. Maybe that is appropriate for an in-person event with some nice drinks.
Sign me up.
I still find it quite crazy how the monitoring and alerting space, even with so much innovation in it, it's still so much work and so hard to set up, even with like amazing tools like the Prometheus Grafana stack. It seems like one of the hardest problems.
I mean, fundamentally, the things that Carlos is describing here is like, yeah, I was working on this stuff, 20 plus years ago. Sounds similar problems. Back in the day, we were talking about things like SNMP traps. Now we're just talking about, Prometheus and Grafana, but it's the same problem. Probably nobody here on this call knows what an SNMP trap is.
I don't, but I remember using Zabbix for like black box monitoring some 10 years ago, and it was such a pain.
Yes, I still have Zabbix running here for my home infrastructure. We're using Isinga for the corporate, and I'm using Zabbix at home. And then
What's
we're going to move
the last
everything
one
over to Prometheus. The Nagios clone, I don't know how to pronounce it. Isinga. Isinga.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Yes, I still get Zabbix alerts. However, how do the rest of you monitor your home lab infrastructure?
The television stops working and yeah.
But the file server in the basement with all your torrents on it, it runs out of disk space. You need to get an alert.
It's my Linux ISOs.
He's also not on Slack, so he may have lost internet or something like that.
I seem to have lost the internet connection.
You seem to be back.
Yes, I only noticed now that I was trying to reach out to the chat and saw myself disconnected. I don't know what happened. Some hiccup in the internet. I'm sorry for these troubles today. When did I drop out? Where were we?
We're still talking about receivers.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Anna?
We were still talking about receivers, and you're going through the code that you had with all of the options there.
Oh, that was like 5 minutes or something like that ago. Okay, I'm terribly sorry. Let's go back to receivers then. I have gone through this. Okay, so I think in receivers there are no. Am I still sharing the screen?
We can't see.
No. Yeah. Resume sharing. Okay. So receivers are. I don't know if you got all of this. Just reasonably simple. You have a list. You can configure them. I was just saying that they don't take too many configuration parameters. Like Slack one just takes the bare minimum: a channel, a token, and an endpoint for a webhook to Slack. All the remaining stuff you see here is kind of cosmetic, and it's about just personalizing or templating the messages and how they look. The list of receivers is pretty big. I went on over that. Should be here. Yes, it supports a ton of them, like Discord, email, PagerDuty, or VictorOps, and webhook, which is pretty neat as it allows you to receive a webhook for Alertmanager, so you can tie up these events to taking some kind of operational action, like event-based, with a simple webhook, which provides you a bridge between metrics and events you derive from those metrics, like signals, and executing some kind of an action. I think, okay, this is still working. Then I went over the routing section. For routing, you start with the top level group by, which does, this is all you have to configure grouping. Alertmanager does allow you to group different messages, different alerts. And it is the only point where you can configure that behavior. You give it a list of labels. So most of the heavy lifting actually has to come from you having a well thought out and consistent labeling scheme that also reflects how you may want to group different alerts. So you come here and you give it a list of labels, and it's going to group on a group all the alerts in which this list of labels matches. I have your alert name. This is kind of a bit silly in the sense that presumably most alerts or almost all alerts will have a different alert name. So by including this parameter here, you kind of are actually not grouping them. You're kind of separating them each one on their own, on its own group. If you take this out and just leave, say, severity, and we have 3 different or 2 different levels of severity, you're making 2 or 3 different groups where each of your alerts will fall into. You have a couple of parameters next. Repeat interval will be how long it repeats the notification. Say something is triggering, it's continuously triggering until it is solved or the conditions changed. You probably want to receive regularly alerts on it, not just the ones, right? This will configure that interval. The group weight and group interval ones are actually related to, when you think about it, you're going to group things, you kind of need a buffer. Alertmanager can't react immediately, otherwise it doesn't get a chance to actually group them. Like say some alert A comes in, and Alertmanager were to route it immediately, and alert B comes in 100 milliseconds later. And it would be an alert that should be grouped with the other one. Like if there's no window of time, a bucket of time to group them with, you will miss that grouping behavior. So that's why those two are related to grouping and are intervals to explain that behavior. These 3 parameters can be overridden at the roots section. So When you come to the roots, you will have a list of matchers, which is, again, labels based. You will select alerts that match these labels, and then you will send them to a particular receiver. So selection will be labels based, maps them to a receiver. And you can also use these sections to override, like, say, repeat interval, when you want to do a match to have a certain group of alerts firing more often or more slowly, or just override those top level parameters. This will be the routing section, and this is all there is to it. Again, it's kind of a simple system, and it builds very much on a strong labeling schema that you need to implement. Going back to the slides. So we went through routing, grouping. Next will be inhibition and silencing roles. So Alertmanager does have a portal. You'll have an HTTP web page. You come in, you can see whatever is firing. You have a nice settings, a nice status page that tells you some info about the Alertmanager deployment. And this one I find particularly useful, which is it tells you what config it's running on, the whole configuration file. And I think this is particularly useful because when you're using Kubernetes stack, different parameters get configured in different places, and then there's config maps that it uses to add stuff and so on. So the end result in terms of configuration is kind of stitched together from multiple sources. So it's kind of neat to be able to just take a look at what the end result of that configuration actually is as a whole. And you have a silences section where you can see your active silences, which there are none. You can just press new silence. You can pick a duration, a starting time, if you want to start the silence in the future. You match again based on label keys. So you can go like environment equals staging. You add this one, and every alert that will match this will be affected by this silence. You fill in, create, and comment, and you can create a silence. So for the next 2 hours, no alerts that have the label environment staging will be routed by Alertmanager. They will still fire, they will still show up on the alert section, but they won't be routed, say, to Slack or to trigger on call or something like that. The primary use case for this is when you're going to perform operations and you know that it's going to trigger alerts, so you want to silence them ahead of time. Okay, just checking that I still have internet. Okay. Inhibition rules. I went about the use case. It's a different configuration section. I'm not sure I have any here. I don't think I have any here, but basically on the Alertmanager config, you just add a new section, inhibition rules, and then not rules. And then the structure goes a bit like that. You have a source match and a target matchers because the source will be the alert that you want to filter for. Say when this alert is firing, then the target matches one, you want to inhibit it. So there's a pair of alerts, you link them together, again with labels. And yes, the ones that need to be equal. And this will inhibit the target one when the source one is firing. I think this covers Alertmanager configuration. So, any questions there? I have some final notes here then. Alertmanager does have a watchdog, which is an alert that is always triggering. I should be able to see it here, actually. I go to alerts. I'm not sure if this... No, this is labels based. Can't search just by text. I think the alert name is watchdog. I'm going to try. No, may have with getting it wrong. Oh, it's capital W. It's case sensitive. There's an alert here firing watchdog, and this is always firing by Alertmanager. Presumably, if you want to watch out for, is my Alertmanager working, you kind of need an external out-of-band system for that, right? It's one of the troubles of infra is that it requires external infra. The purpose of that watchdog will be that use case. You can filter for it, and you can route it to something which will be out of band for you. Some service that will fire when your Alertmanager is down. Okay, so we went over this. We need a very strong labeling schema. And then I have some points here for discussion. Let me see how we're in time. We're a bit short. I'm going to come back to this one, and I'm going to move ahead to the demo one. Putting it all together, let's showcase how you'll go about setting up some roles with alerts. But first, let me open up Grafana and go to the Explorer. And I have here a query, and we'll go over this one a bit more slowly. So let me start by taking things out. This is for log messages. And I don't know if you've used Loki before. So I'm just going to do a simple query to fetch logs from a particular instance in a particular namespace. It shouldn't take too long, but our test deployment isn't the quickest sometimes. There it is. Okay, so we start, we have a logql query giving us a bunch of log messages, right? There's something wrong here. I think it's giving me the results for before I deleted some parts of this thing I copy pasted here. Because there's a graph here, that shouldn't be a graph. That should be just log lines. And this is metrics. Yes, what's wrong is that I have the wrong source. Okay, here we go. So source Loki, doing a query for log messages. And we can filter this messages. It has this have like topics equals something slot, next proposal slot. Loki has a nice formatter for that type of structure, where it just takes those key values and puts them into labels. So now my messages should have, say this message has a topics thing, that should be a label topics with that content. Here it is, topics beacon nodes. So it kind of lifts all of your key value pairs on the logging messages into labels. So that will be step one. There's also a JSON parser, by the way, that you can use. Let me see what else I have next. And then I was filtering for the sync label. Yes. So that should be. Now I'm going to filter my messages for only the ones that pertain to that have a sync field. So I'm interested in saying I need to adapt this because this node is synced. So if I'm filtering for messages in which it says it's not synced, I don't get anything. Okay, so it filtered down to the messages that do have a sync parameter. It has here like sync equals sync. All of these messages now show up here. And okay, we start here. We have a query that gives us messages of interest. We have now a sync label. Say you want to create an alert for when your Nimbus node or log/node isn't synced, right? Please interrupt me if you have any questions about this. The structure so far is doing a query for a particular instance, parsing it to log formatter to lift key values and the messages into labels, and then I'm filtering on the sync label. And I was forced to do something like sync equals anything, and the purpose of this one is just to actually filter only for the message that do have a sync label that is not empty. And sync is different from originally I had different, but now I have equal. In sync says sync. So I'm reversing the alert. I'm gonna want to build an alert that tells me when the node is synced instead of out of sync. So I have here the filter I want. So how can we express this? What we would want next would be some kind of a counter or a time window, right? Yes. We can do this. I don't think this is going to work yet because it needs a function. Yes. Loki has a few aggregation functions to do that sort of thing. Basically count number of log lines, which is the basic construct you want to use to be able to alert on something. Like it says, you want to receive an alert when a log message is present. You need to count over time for that. So this basic construct will give me the number of log messages that met that query. Now in a kind of a metric. There you go. Now it's turned that query into metrics, and I have values for the time window I chose, which was 30 seconds. I'm going to change this to 60. Seems a bit slow, 30 seconds. Maybe I get more hits. Yes, I've changed a bit. Okay, so this turned my logs query into a source of metrics. And from this point onwards, you kind of treat it a bit like you treat Prometheus roles. You now have a counter, you have 60 seconds, and you want to know when this is bigger than 0. Say, I have a few more things here. Yes. I'll go over this part next. There's one problem here, which is originally I was trying to make an alert for when it's out of sync. And this results in no logging messages. And when it finds no logging messages, Loki returns to you no data. Not the metrics saying there's 0, but there's actually no data because there were no logging log messaging matches. The way you can work around that is with this construct, which you kind of see a lot in Prometheus, which is, okay, give me this or give me an alternative. And there's a function called vector where it just generates a vector with some constant value. In this case, we want 0. And there's this on function as well, which will be familiar to you if you're familiar with Prometheus roles. But if you're not with ProbQL, when you give it a construct of this type, this metric or some other metric, you kind of need to specify how it's going to match them in terms of labels. By default, it will only match them if they have the exact same labels. But this factor we have here won't have any labels at all. The on parameter is where you will specify label 1, label 2, well, like match those two metrics like with those labels matching. If you give it an empty on set, it will just disregard labels completely and will just always match it to vector 0, which is what we actually want. So you add this to the end, it fixes the no data issue. You now have a constant 0 unless there's some log line matching here. I'm going to change this back to an equal instead of inequality because the node is actually synced, and I want data here. So there. Okay, so now we have a problem QL. You have metrics and you have a problem QL. The only thing you need to turn this expression into an alert is making it conditional, which should be something like when this is bigger than 0. And you will create a locky rule with it. And we can go take a look at them. They look like this. There's a rules, there's an alert. You give it a name, there's an expression. On the expression, you just basically it's that piece of code we just saw. And there's a few parameters. You can add some extra labels, and there's an annotation section. This annotation section is actually reasonably important. This is the field that Alertmanager will look at in terms of giving you a summary of what's firing. You can have a description. There's a couple of fields. And this metadata will be used by Alertmanager to notify you with contextual information about what's firing, along with the labels. Okay, any questions here?
I guess my only question so far is, can these rules be programmatically written, or you have to write them in the UI?
I mean, you basically, you can feed them as values configurations to your Kubernetes Helm chart or however it is you're deploying, but I think you're mostly leveraging Helm charts, right? And if you're using Kubernetes stack, you basically append or add stuff to the list. Let me show you in a second. I have.
Yeah, okay, that's what I mean. That's what I want. I want it to be attached to the Helm chart and not, going into the Grafana UI and writing rules.
No, not the UI. You just no. This is well. For one thing, a lot of our workloads have, in terms of Prometheus roles, not Loki but Prometheus. If you're using the Prometheus operator, that means that you're creating roles, or you can create roles by creating that CRD, right? That Prometheus role CRD. And then the operator will just take all the Prometheus role objects exist in your cluster and dynamically generate a configuration for Prometheus based on them. So you can do that very easily programmatically. There's no issue. Loki does not have an operator like that, or it does not have one as mature as the Prometheus one. So on the chart, you do have like a value section where you can, I don't know where it is. This has become very complex. Give me a second. I should be able to find it somewhere. There it is. Okay, so for instance, here we have configured the values, ruler, directories, fake, roles.yaml, and then I'm just using templating, Go templating here to read files. So in an attempt to make this more manageable, I rather have a directory with files where I put the roles in instead of having this huge value file, right? You can leverage Go templating if you're using Elm file. To break this apart, you import the files here, and then you can segregate it by files, and it's just pieces of YAML, right? So yes, you can generate this dynamically or programmatically. How you do that kind of depends how it fits into your whole system. In our case, we're using Elm file, and we have access to Go templating there. We can break it apart in files, which is a bit more convenient. But yes, it's like that. You won't create it in the UI now.
Okay, perfect. Now with the Helm charts are you going to have some default alerting rules already there for people to use, or we're expecting people using Kubernetes Launchpad to come up with their own alert settings?
Well, we've been developing some, and there's a few challenges there. So we're actually happy to take your feedback there as well, which is we're developing some default alert rules, and at least for metrics ones, it makes a ton of sense to ship them with the workloads because we have the operator and they can be neatly packed with the workloads as Prometheus rules. So we do plan to include those. On the general view of things, like Loki is a bit more tricky because it does not have an operator like that, and it's harder to pack in to tie the rules to the workloads. That complicates it a bit in terms of distribution. But the second issue is all of this kind of leans on a labeling schema. And where we will pack those rules will be at the charts level. But where we do set labels, a bit more detailed labels that we leverage ourselves, is at the namespaces level. So it's going to be hard to develop very useful rules without also being very opinionated and starting, like putting a lot of labels in place. But labels are a bit, like bring your own, and I don't think there's one size fit all. So there's that trade-off there and complication. But yes, we would like to at least package a few default ones, like if the node is certain blocks behind, or error rate for RPCs, like basic stuff like that.
Right.
We do intend to try and find a solution for that. But do you have any opinion about the problematic of labeling? Because the default, I'm going to show you something. I think it's quite useful, and we're at time, so this is a bit rushed. You want to know if your node is blocks behind, right? So you need a source for that.
Yeah.
And you are either going to have to rely on some external oracle that tells you that you've fetched data from and ingested into your Prometheus as metrics. So you have a source of what's the current chain head. Or you kind of try to build your own you have multiple nodes, so you have multiple sources, and you trust that you want just what's the latest I've seen somewhere, right? And that's going to be your working chain head.
The way we do it currently is we're just doing delta of last block versus current time. That way we don't need any external sources. So we know the current clock, and if we know
Yes.
if we get the last block from the chain, which you can get from an RPC call, then you can calculate the time difference, and that's what we use currently to generate an alert.
Yes, you know when it starts ingesting, right?
What do you mean?
With that, Yeah. Okay, I was just going to point out, for instance, we've built this. I think it's a useful metric to just give you what's the maximum latest chain head block that you've seen across all of your deployments, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to build a metric like this to use on some kind of alert, which is kind of useful, you kind of need to be able to group these metrics by chain and network, right? Latest head only has meaning for a particular network from a particular chain. So you can only do that with proper labels on the deployments that are labeling, okay, this node is that network, that chain. So it's hard to build alerts that will work for everyone because you very quickly face this kind of, okay, you want to build stuff, but you kind of need to rely on some kind of fixed labeling schema.
Yep, understood. We have such a fixed labeling schema in our infrastructure.
Yes. But it's hard for us to provide one because I do believe that you will never it's very much something people want to own.
Yeah, I guess, the thing I struggle with a bit is I think one of the stated purposes of Launchpad is to allow new users to get up to speed quickly. For that, then obviously, having all this knowledge about what is the right threshold to say that Ethereum is out of sync and you need to look at it is, that's a lot of operational experience to figure out what that is. So encoding that out of the box is a good value add. However, as you just said, encoding it out of the box then, raises the, well, we've encoded it this way, and then if you don't like it, well, then you have to redo it. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge to figure out what's the right level of what is included out of the box.
There's a few niceties that we've run into, and I'll give you a very quick example. For instance, Arbitrum. Arbitrum Nitro are default deployments do not use peer-to-peer, and it's set as a get fork, right? So it has all the metrics that get has, including the peer-to-peer one. It just sets them to 0. So even if but for the metric peer-to-peer peers, how many peers it's connected to, it's kind of similar across Aragon and Get. They both share the same metric name. So it's easy to build a general alert. You go like, okay, I want to be alerted when there are less than 10 peers connected. But Arbitrum does not use peer-to-peer, but has that metric. It's just set it to 0. So the metric exists, but always registers as 0. Which means that if you do a general alert like that, like it's a worthless metric. So there are some polishing that we also plan to introduce, like now that we're building this observability stack with Launchpad. One thing we will include will be dropping those metrics out of Arbitrum because they're worthless, right? Metrics that will always be 0 and they have no real life value. We're ingesting, they get in the way of you being able to make a general alert for if this metric exists, alert me, because then there will be cases where the metric exists and it's always set at 0 and it's meaningless. Same thing applies to Arbitrum Classic nodes. At some point, they set the latest chain head to 0. So you have like the deployment there that registers that metric, but always reads as 0. Triggering your general alert, your attempt at building a general alert that works across, all of that. So fine-tuning this, like dropping certain metrics on the service monitors that we're shipping and stuff like that, will be something we'll bubble up to the charts and to Launchpad namespaces in time. But I'm not sure if you can go yet to that, like to do as much as we would like that balance we just discussed between well, what makes sense for us to ship and one size fits all, or there's value there, or what's not going to have value because people will want to build it themselves or customize it too much themselves.
Yeah. So I guess, for us, for this problem where the different blockchains have different metrics, is we've kind of standardized on, each node needs to report things to a standard format, which is the, Pinax format. And then, no matter which blockchain tech, well, either supports it or doesn't, but then once we get the metric, we know that it's consistent, right? So that's why we use something like, amount of time since the last block, because now that's a consistent thing that we can support across every single chain, whether it's a roll up, whether it's an L1, L2, whatever. It's consistent. Now, what's different is the threshold that we apply to that time. On Arweave, blocks are every couple of minutes. On Arbitrum, they're every, 0.2 seconds. So the threshold has to be different, but the metric is the same. So
we were thinking about looking into rate of new blocks, right? Which I think kind of ends up being the same as you just described. But looking at the time implicitly is the same thing as rate.
But some blockchains have a variable rate. Like Arweave is not consistent; it varies over time.
Does that not also impact the time latest block time?
Of course, so we set it high enough to not get an alert. You know, if it's less than 30 minutes, it's good. You know, whereas Arbitrum is like maybe 30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, it needs a lot of workload-specific adjustments. We also realize that, and we will try to bubble some of it up where it makes sense in terms of added value. But yeah, work in progress. We're also still building this. We actually built a few basic alerts already for blockchains, but we haven't added them to the charts yet. But we'll do.
Yeah, this is a challenging space for sure.
Yeah, it is. So we're at time. Any final questions or let's see.
I have lots more questions, but that's probably enough for today.
Okay, so I hope you drop by next time and you can keep asking them. So thanks everyone for coming. And I think we're already 10 minutes